Quality has come a long way.
Come a long way, baby.
Come a long way, baby, in the past 40 years or so. And,
Right.
and we have gone, really, in those 40 years, from trying to inspect quality into our products to preventing them from getting there in the first place. And we've talked about, way back when, we used to talk about, rejects in the 10,000 parts per million or 20,000 parts per million. Then we got down to, rejects and, maybe the hundreds of parts per million. And now there's companies out there that are measuring or reporting rejects in the parts per billion. I mean, that's almost Phil Crosby's zero defects,
well,
practically.
we talked about Crosby. Just talked about
exactly.
Crosby. Now conformance to
we're getting really close.
That's right.
And there's a lot of methodologies that are kind of contributing to getting down to this parts per billion rejects. And our next guest, Chad Kymal, wrote the article From Percent Rejects to Parts per Billion, Moving Toward Zero Defects, which will appear in next Monday's, Quality Digest Daily. And in that article, he explains a little bit about how we have moved from PPM or parts per million to parts per billion. And Chad is with us now via Skype to talk about that. Hi, Chad.
Hi, Dirk.
Hey,
hi, Mike.
So just really cutting to the chase here. So briefly, how have companies moved from percent rejects or parts per million to really kind of phenomenally parts per billion rejects?
Dirk, it even came as a surprise to me. So in this article and in the webinar we're going to do next week, I focus on disciplined new product development, then a very important tool, FMEAs. Third is the corrective action, linking back into the preventive action, which is the FEMA, that we use to drive new product development. And I'd like to highlight one of my customers, a very large customer with something like 300 plants globally that were, as you said, they were in 20,000 to 50,000 ppm. So this is one of the things I like to tell my current aerospace customers, that if you stick to these processes, a disciplined new product development process, the FMEAs, and linking back of tools like the 8D or corrective action back into the FMEAs, there's a tremendous benefit. There are other things that you also have to do, but in the article, I really focused on these tools. And just to tell you a little bit about this customer that we've been working since 1995, about 10 years ago, we're under 100 ppm.
Wow.
And then they dropped to, the VP of quality told me when I bragged, because I was the president of the Semiconductor Assembly Council out in Silicon Valley, and we had assembly plants who make assembled chips be below 10 ppm. When I talked about it, then he mentioned to me how most of his plants were below 30 ppm. Fast forward to 2017, we're still working with them, and they are in parts per billion. So it's not just one company. This is what we're finding with the high-tech companies we work with and the manufacturing companies we work with that are using these tools.
Chad, that's pretty phenomenal. And if there was one thing you could point to that is, or maybe there isn't just one thing, or maybe a couple things. What would you point to say what is the reason that companies have been able to get down to these, parts per billion? Is there one thing in particular that they're doing, or is it a couple things that tie into all this?
So what I'd like to maybe focus on, the one thing is the FMEA tool. Of course, this is where the software comes into play. And use of software enabling the use of these tools. So I'm going to go into some technical jargon here, if you don't mind, Dirk.
Okay.
The design FMEA needs to link with the test plans. So design FMEAs are driven. So you look at the functions of the product, look at the failure modes of the product. I'm going to fast forward. And then you decide, identify the important characteristics, critical and significant characteristics, and populate the process flow, PFEMA, control plan, and I call it risk-based work instructions. That single process done right will have immense benefit inside the organization. Then, you have to take your corrective action and then make sure you take the corrective action and drive it back into the FMEA, and to use the FMEAs, which are family-based, product family, process family, and when you come up with a new product, you have to use that information for the new product. So this is how, they continuously reduce the PPM levels, and it works. And if the healthcare industry used it, it would work again there.
Exactly.
Seriously.
So Chad, how do field reports, things like field reports, customer feedback, how does that tie into the FMEA?
All right, so I missed that part. It's a very good question. Really, when we started doing FMEAs, and I started doing FMEAs in 1985. 1985, Dr. Deming helped Ford Motor Company write 20 questions into a 20-question Q101 standard. First 2 questions were FMEAs, okay? Well, FMEA and control plans. And we started by doing brainstorming. We brainstormed failure modes. Not anymore. We learned maybe about 15, 18 years ago that you have to look at real data, the warranty data, the field failures, internal scrap, rework. Take a Pareto of it, and your teams, your cross-functional teams doing your design FMEA and the process FMEA have to use this real data in terms of looking at your failure modes. So those failures are the failure modes, Mike. And then from there, you identify the effect of the failure, the cause of the failure, the preventive and detective controls, and then you drive to recommended action. I can tell you so many things everybody does wrong in these tools, but the great story is, despite all that, there's tremendous benefit that has come from this.
And so Chad, so that makes sense. I understand about taking actual field data. Obviously this is how it failed. So let's tie that back, this real data back into the process. But is there still value in brainstorming failure modes that may not have happened yet?
Yes. So, and this, we sometimes call it DRBFM. It's a fancy word of focusing on the changes. So when you look at the historical information for things that haven't changed, but then you have to look at the things that have changed in the new product, new technology. There, if you don't have history, you do have to brainstorm. So it's a mixture of actual failures and potential failures, in terms of driving out defects.
Okay. Well, Chad Kymal, as usual, CTO and founder of Omnex. He's going to be joining us actually in a webinar that's going to be coming up on this topic. So if you're interested in learning more on this topic, Omnex and us will be doing a webinar called From Percent Rejects to Parts Per Billion, and that's next week on Tuesday, October 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And Chad here is going to be presenter, and I will be the host. So keep an eye in your email inbox for an invitation. And actually, I believe there's also a link underneath the player page there that you can click on to go out to the registration page. So, Chad, we're looking forward to talking with you next week on this.
Dirk, I'll just leave with this thought. Some very important concepts of design and process reuse, which really reduces development costs, will be also one of the things we feature when we meet next time.
Okay, and your webinars are always really informative, yes. So encourage everybody to go out there and sign up. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks, Chad.
Thanks, Chad. We'll see you next week.
Okay.